Welcome to the Bronx Veterans Archival Initiative. Today is Friday, October 27th, 2023. My name is Pastor Crespo Jr. I'm the research librarian and the archivist here at the Bronx County Historical Society. Today, I am joined by Vanessa Ortiz, a U.S. Army veteran who served 16 years in the U.S. Army Reserves and was assigned to the 353rd Civil Affairs Command here in the Bronx. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you.
How you doing today?
Good.
Great. Well, great to have you here. Thank you for making time in your tight schedule to be with us here tonight. We like to start out all our oral histories by asking everyone to tell us about your family's background and history. Where do your parents come from?
Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which cities in Puerto Rico, and can you talk to us about each if you know?
Sure. My father is from San Sebastian, and my mother's from San Germán. They're both very proud to be from there. So that's in the west side of the island. They met here in New York in the 1950s when there was the big migration into New York from Puerto Rico, and specifically El Barrio in the Bronx was where Puerto Ricans were coming and finding work and finding affordable housing. So they met at a jewelry store that my mother was working in Harlem, and my father's sister was her compañera, and there was, I guess, an introduction made. So there it is. I think something like less than a year later, they were making their wedding plans.
Wow. Did they ever discuss to you the reasons why they decided to migrate to New York?
Yeah, I think, for my father, his family was very much on there's more opportunity there are more jobs there. I guess some of the industries in Puerto Rico were not doing as well as they used to do because other industries from Latin America and Central America were opening up for the U.S. So the big sugarcane and other productions were, I guess, not as I don't know what to say. Like the trade was decreasing,
Right.
and that affected the job market there. So they were looking to New York and United States for those opportunities. I think for my mother, it was probably the same, although I think for women, differently than men, they were moving if their families were moving there. So, like going with sisters, going with aunts, going with parents, rather than going by themselves, the way that men were.
Okay.
So, I think both of them came with family or with a connection from family. A family member was already here, and it was like, okay, now I can go because there's an apartment set up, there's a place to work. And so all those networks and connections that were being built were drawing people to come.
Right. Did they happen to tell you what year that they came?
I think it was the mid 1950s. I think the early to mid 1950s.
Okay.
My sister would kill me because she would know exactly the date and all that, but I'm just going to generalize. It was the midnight. I think that by 1955 they were here.
Okay. Did your father ever tell you any stories about old Puerto Rico?
Oh yes, he still does.
Can you recount any memorable story you had that he told you, if you can remember?
Yeah, I mean, it's the typical stories that most people, older people, tell about how they had to walk to school. I'm sure that you've heard it too. I had to walk 5 miles to get to school, and I was barefoot. So like my father tells those stories,
right,
of having to cross the creeks and how long it took. Also, like the school was, they would wake up early, have to feed all the animals on the farm, have to tend to all their duties of, the eggs and, some chores of feeding the animals and cleaning up the pig pens and all that, and then eat breakfast and then go to school. So like by the time it came time to walk to school, they had already been up and working for a couple of hours. So my father tells those stories of, you know, combination of hardship, but also like fond memories. Because I guess when you're in that, and that's what everybody does, it is what it is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And do you know how old he was? Did he work in Puerto Rico before he came here? Was he too young?
My father came when he was about 17. So, yes, his father owned a store. From what I recall him telling us, they were very successful stores. So the kids always worked a combination of the land and the store.
God.
So when they were small, they were tending to the land. And then as they got older and could handle inventory and stock and money and all that, then they would move to the little shop.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did your father ever tell you what neighborhood he migrated to when he first got to New York? I mean, you said El Barrio.
Yeah, it was El Barrio. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it was like 106th, on the east side. Maybe there was some living on the margins, like in the hundreds, but closer to Madison Avenue
Got it.
and Lenox. I think my father, because I actually rented on Lenox and 117th a couple of years ago, and my father was saying, I grew up here. I remember I had an apartment here. I had an apartment there, and I was like, really? So it's a lot of memories there in Harlem.
Got
And I
it.
don't think at that time it was defined as El Barrio. I think that came later.
Right. Okay. And your mother also into the El Barrio?
Yeah, my mother also, although like I think that quickly there was like this migration to the Bronx. My mother came with her sisters. My mother was an orphan. She didn't have a mother. Her mother died very, very early. So it was kind of like, let's do this together and no man left behind. It was going to be like, we're doing this. So my mother lived with her sister for a while until she married my father.
Okay. And, just thinking back, did they tell you any stories about El Barrio, when they first got there?
Yeah.
How were the conditions for them? Did they ever tell you?
Yeah, they say that it was okay. My father tells us about, it was very affordable for poor people. I remember my father said that when, because back then everybody dressed up, you
That's
wore
right.
suits and all that. And my father said that there was a tailor that was Jewish that used to come to the neighborhoods and the apartment buildings door to door. And he would come with the fabrics and all that, and everything was tailor made. And then you would get on this layaway plan, like this slow payment plan.
Oh, wow.
So he would come, like every week and give the progress of the suit and do some more measurements, take a little bit more money. And that's how people, got their nice suits and everything like very fitted. My mother was a, sewist. So she was good at that and she could just go to the stores, buy the fabric. There were lots of fabric stores and all that
Right.
back then. A lot of people did that work themselves. So, my mother made her own clothing. So I do remember my parents talking about that. My father told this funny story when we were walking around when I was living in Harlem. And he told me, we were walking into Central Park at 110th Street. And he said, I remember that I was dating a girl. And, we were walking together. He said it was me and my friend and the girl. And we were walking together and we were sitting on one of these benches. So it was like 110th and 5th. And he said, and this group of guys came up to us like with bats and everything, like to beat us up. And he said, my father, like they were just like, oh my God, what's happening? Like they didn't know if it was a gang or something like that. And there was like a bit of a fist fight. And my father says, I ran so fast back home that I left the girl and my friend behind. He said, I was just like, boom. And when he got back to the apartment, he realized like, oh, wow, where's my friend? And where's the girl? So he started walking back. On the way back, the friend is walking. And he says, what happened to you? Whatever. And my father said, I don't know. It was just like my reaction was just run. And it turns out that those guys, it wasn't like a gang thing or, a robbery or anything like that. It was that she was dating one of those guys at the same time that she was kind of dating my father. So, like, when they caught my father and the friend with the girl, they just wanted revenge. So that was just a funny story of, like, we're walking into Central Park and he could point to the bench and it happened here and I ran that way. And, and it's just like, you never told us this story when we were young. He said, I'm just thinking of it because we're walking around here. So, when we go to the South Bronx or when we go into Harlem, my father will have different stories. But, he's older now, so it's not like we're walking around these places anymore. But that's how I kind of captured a lot of this.
Are your parents in the Bronx now?
My father is in the Bronx. Yeah, my mom passed away in 2020.
My condolences.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow. Did she live in the Bronx?
Oh, yeah. We grew up in the South Bronx. Yeah. When my parents started having children, they moved to the South Bronx. There's a big Puerto Rican community at that time. Right. A lot of that migration of, Irish and Italian and Jewish, they were leaving all of these tenements, and Puerto Ricans, Black people were moving in, and so a lot of the buildings were just Spanish language speakers and a lot of nice families. I remember when I was little, and we lived in Avenue St. John in the South Bronx, and they just had great neighbors, I remember hearing stories and hearing the parents talk in the hallways and all that, because it was all walk-up buildings. Mm-hmm. So everybody knew everybody else, and it was like the sanitation is not coming, nobody's cleaning the hallways anymore. There's a lot of complaints about that, that just no one is taking care of the buildings anymore. And we all know what happened. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of fires and a lot of, suspected arson for insurance money and all that. And, like, I just remember being small and hearing a lot of talking about the degradation of the neighborhood and the buildings. So,
now, what neighborhood did you grow up in?
So I grew up, that was in Avenue St. John. Then my parents, the projects were being built, and a lot of families that lived in those old dilapidated buildings started putting in their applications to move to the projects. That was going to be like the next best thing, because there's going to be services and land and playgrounds and all that. So it was my father thought it was a great move, plus the apartments were bigger. So I grew up on Tinton Avenue, to Jackson Avenue Station. Mm-hmm. Those projects that are there, I forget what they're called. Is it John Adams? Something like that. Anyway, it's a housing complex there.
Okay.
6th floor, apartment 6F.
What were your earliest memories?
It was, the elevators. It was kind of a new thing. The school was right across the street. There's a Catholic school across from the 3 project complexes. It's called St. Anselm School. Right. It's just really nice to look at. That was the view from the window. And I went to school there. My parents, a lot of parents at that time did not have faith in the safety of the public schools. Mm-hmm. So they saved up all their chavitos every month, and they were going to put their kids in those Catholic schools. So, my parents had 5 of us, and all 5 of us went to that school.
Wow. So, can you tell me, you're walking out of the projects, what decade, and what do you see, what do you smell, what are you hearing, mm-hmm. As you're walking out onto the streets from the projects?
Yeah. So, it was a little chaotic. Projects and large buildings, there's a lot of people. There was a lot of bad kids. There was a lot of community monitoring of the lobby in particular. Mm-hmm. There was groups of mothers that would, hang out in the lobby, A, to gossip, B, to make sure that the kids were getting in and out of the lobby and into the elevator safely. Because there were families that probably had parents that were working 2, 3 jobs. They had no parental supervision. There were no babysitters. You know, when that happens, kids do what they want. They start making trouble. This was the age where you started seeing more and more graffiti on the walls.
What decade was this?
So this was in the 60s.
Okay.
Yeah, this was in the 60s. So I remember there was a lot of chaos and a lot of warnings that, you know, you don't walk from here to here by yourself. The playground of the projects was completely off limits. To my mother was like, you don't go there to play. So there's 5 of us. So we played in the apartment, you know, we just made games in the hallway from the one room to another. We would make train tracks, and we would use ropes, and we would use boxes, and we just entertained ourselves inside the house. And on the weekends, when my father wasn't working, he would take us upstate, like Rockland Lake and Beacon and places like that, to really get fresh air. That was a time also where the New York Botanical Garden was just open. It was just open space. It wasn't the way that it is now. I mean, now it's just beautiful, but there's membership fees and all that. And my parents would take us there also, just go play on the rocks, play on the trees. It wasn't as protected as it is now in terms of, like, you cannot climb a tree in the New York Botanical Gardens now, but back then you could. So I remember we went there a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds cool to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. You know, we could, like, my parents they were really smart, and they had a goal. Like, we were going to be good kids. We were going to be safe. We were not going to get involved in all the street stuff that was going on.
Right.
Those were the times where gangs were becoming more and more popular. Those were the times where smoking pot in the hallways. If we walked down the stairs, which my parents never allowed us to do, you saw a lot of kids in the stairway doing drugs. My parents were like, you do not use the stairs, use the elevator, you know? So there was a lot of restrictions when you lived in the projects, if you had parents that were, you know, watching and really cared. The parents that were too busy or had broken homes or whatever was, you know, they were the ones that were in the hallways making trouble and all that.
What music did your parents listen to at home?
Yeah. So, you know, my mother wanted us to be American like everyone else. She wanted us to speak English fluently. She wanted us to have excellent grammar. So she would put on all the songs that were popular to most average Americans back then. Like, if it was the musical, The Sound of Music, we were listening to The Sound of Music. If it was Lawrence Welk, greatest, you know, artist hits, we were listening to that. My mother was very much like, you're not going to be pigeonholed into this, you know, Puerto Rican music, although we did have that, especially during the holidays.
Right.
You know, that's where we saw more of the traditional music being played. But on a day-to-day, you know, it was Christmas carols that were Americans. It was La Tuna de Calle from Puerto Rico. Okay. You know, like, my mother really was I think she had a goal that we were going to be integrated fully, that we were going to have the same rights, the same jobs, the same access, the same language skills as every other American here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, to the detriment of Spanish language, because I have to say, sometimes when you're like that, then the Spanish starts to go away a little bit, because the English becomes a primary language in the house. So my parents would speak to us in Spanish, and we would speak back in English.
Right.
And little by little, you start losing Spanish. And yeah, so I think that we all struggled with Spanish when we were in high school, because it was like, wait, but how do you spell that? How do you say that? I mean, like, the proper, it's just, it's all by the ear. It's not by the grammar or by the written or anything like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what did your parents do for a living?
So my mother, she started out, like I said, when they met, she was just working at a watch and jewelry store. But she had a college degree from Puerto Rico, University of Puerto Rico. So she quickly, you know, because of the needs of Puerto Ricans in the South Bronx and Harlem, She got a job as a social worker with Catholic Charities,
Wow.
and then later on with the Puerto Rican Family Institute. So she was a social worker for a good long time. Like, really, that's a hard job, and that's a very high risk job.
Yes, it is.
The kind of families that she was visiting and the kind of buildings that she had to get into to visit them, that was like, I'm like, my mother had a lot of guts to do that. But she was fluent in English, fluent in Spanish, and she was a natural for that. Later on, after that, there was a period where she didn't work because she was raising 5 kids. When she got back to work, she became a teacher. And she was a teacher for then the rest of her career, like a good 25 years.
Wow.
Teaching. She taught at St. Anselm's School.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just across the street.
Just across the street.
Okay.
But she taught there when we moved away because story about the projects, it started out as like these great new big apartments, but it was so many people in situations of, either alcoholism or absentee parents, crime, drugs, that my parents saw that this is not safe anymore for us.
Right.
And they saved their money and bought a house in the Soundview area of the Bronx.
Okay. All right.
Metcalf Avenue. So from 8th grade onward, that's where we lived.
Okay. And how about your father? What did he do for a living?
My father was, he worked in Newark, New Jersey for a corrugated paper manufacturing company. Yeah. He drove all his life to Newark, New Jersey and back for work for 30-something years.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a lot of driving.
It is. That's dedication to take care of your family right there.
Yeah.
I don't even like to drive to Brooklyn.
It's like that bridge every day, 2 times a day. I can't believe he did it.
Wow.
Yeah. And back then the cars were not like they are now,
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's something else. Now, you spoke earlier about gangs, in the neighborhood. Do you recall what gangs there were? And, tell us about, the gang activity in the neighborhood, if you recall.
I mean, in the neighborhood, I wouldn't say at that time that there was concrete gangs in the projects.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were a lot of troublemakers. I think there was a lot of drugs. But gangs and shootouts and stuff like that, no, not back then. Not through. We moved out in 1977, and at I was in the 8th grade, so it is possible that my parents just kept us from that, whatever was going on. But with my own eyes, I did not see anything. I think it was more when you start getting out of the neighborhood and you start walking like toward Intervale Avenue, I remember, or a little bit south. This is where you saw the burnt out buildings and a lot of graffiti. And if my mother would take us on the train, and the trains would be like covered in artwork of every kind, but it just felt dark and strange, and like, the trains back then were noisy and they were just graffitied up, and it just felt like strange.
So, when did you go to elementary school, and what elementary school did you go to?
So it was St. Anselm's, all the way through 8th grade. And then when we moved to Soundview, then we were all getting into high school at that time. And I went to St. Helena Commercial High School, which does not exist anymore, but it was an offshoot of Monsignor Scanlon. I don't know if you know, Monsignor Scanlon is up before you cross the Whitestone Bridge.
Oh, okay.
It's there.
Got
it's the school there. It's the Catholic.
What are your fondest memories of that high school?
Oh, I just remember that,
friends.
It was like a new neighborhood. It was kind of nice. It was a small school with all of these woods in the back. Like, it was very green. Mm-hmm. I just remember looking out the windows and saying, this is so pretty. It was just like trees and trees. I just remember having a lot of good friends. I do remember that it was majority Irish and Italian from the Bronx, like from the northern Bronx, like Rock's Neck, Country Club, Pelham Parkway, like those areas. And there was probably maybe 10% of us that were Latino or Black. And we kind of always stuck together. We intermingled and all that, but I think that the commonality of our music kind of forced two different groups. And I remember at lunchtime, you could sit with the Puerto Rican group, you could sit with the Black group, or you could sit with the Italian, Irish, and everybody else. And I used to like to circulate myself. You know, I like making friends with everybody. So I would just spend a little while here, spend a little while here, then I would sit back here, then I would sit back here. You know, so it wasn't like mean or bullying kind of a thing. It was like just a very natural thing. We come from these neighborhoods, we know each other's music, we dance together on the weekends, and these people did the same, you know, but we weren't really invited to each other's parties.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. I understand. Now, what music did you listen to in high school? What was popular?
So what was popular? I mean, I would say like Motown, um, some salsa, but it was like mostly family salsa. I feel like the salsa scene came a little bit later, like, you know, the club scene and Willie Colon and all that. Yeah, but it was mostly soul music. Yeah,
Got
yeah, soul music, some disco as it started, you know, coming
it.
into play, but definitely not anything like hard rock or um, techno or like, no, that those kids listen to that, you know.
Right.
We didn't listen to that.
Was hip hop, or I guess hip hop, was rap music coming about back then?
That came not in high school days for me.
Okay.
It came later.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And now, when did you graduate high school, and what did you do immediately thereafter?
So because I went to this commercial high school, all the kids learned either typing, stenography, or bookkeeping. So mostly they put the boys in bookkeeping and they put the girls in typing and stenography. That's how it was back then. You were, you know, this school put you on a track to work right after high school, not college. It wasn't college prep or anything like that. And that was okay with me because I didn't want to go to college. I was just like, I would watch shows on television, and like when I saw a professional woman that was walking around Manhattan and had her own job and had her own apartment, that was like, I want to be her. You know, so I always told my parents, I don't want to go to college. I want to work. So I was setting myself up to have these skills that was going to put me in an office. So I went to work after high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when did you get that idea? I'm gonna join the U.S. Army Reserves.
Yeah, that came a couple of years later when I started realizing that, you know, you're working in an office. I was like so young, and everybody's like has these degrees and, you know, college degrees, Wharton Business School. And I'm hearing about all these cool schools that all the smart people are going to. They have the offices. I'm sitting out in the cubicle, you know? And I started realizing like school is really important, and I have to get something. I have to do something to make more money. And I remember I was a secretary, right? Because that's what I studied, steno and typing. So I was a secretary, and my boss was lovely, you know, very nice Jewish man. He always gave me good advice and all. And I remember once he sent me on an errand to another department, and it was called the graphic design department, to deliver something. They make charts and stuff like that. And when I walked into that department, I was like, oh my God, I want to work here. I was like, this is what I want to do. I don't want to type letters and all this stuff. I want to do artwork. So I was just like all about that. I started talking to people that worked in that department, having lunch with them. They were so nice to me because I was just like this young girl that wanted to learn what you do and how did you study. And I remember one woman in particular really was helpful, and she told me, why don't you start taking classes at Parsons School of Design? It's downtown. The courses are really great. And I was just like, okay. And I went downtown one day after work and I got all the brochures and I just started saving my money to study art. And it dawned on me, like back then you could see all these commercials about the reserves, like Be All You Can Be and all these commercials. And I was like, maybe that's a way I could make some money. I could be a reserve person and make that money, and then I could work full time and make that money. And if I joined the reserves, then I could also get college benefits. So I went to the Times Square recruitment station one day at lunchtime and I said, I want to join the Army. And it was like the Marine Corps desk, the Navy, the Army guy, and the Coast Guard, and the Navy. The Navy, yeah.
Air Force also.
And the Air Force, exactly. Everybody had a desk. So then they looked at me and they said, well, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be an artist. I want to be an artist or a photographer. One of those two. I don't want to do anything else for the military. And so the reserve guy, everybody took my phone number, whatever, and they were like, we'll see what we could do. And I got a call 2 weeks later from the Army guy. And he told me there's a slot in this unit that's at Fordham Road, 353rd Civil Affairs Command. I had no idea what Civil Affairs was. But he said, you first have to go to basic training, then you have to go to your illustrator training, and then after that, you can work at that unit because they have a slot available. That MOS is available there.
What was the MOS?
Illustrator, 81 Echo.
And that, for everyone, military occupational specialty.
Right.
Your job.
Yeah.
So what was it again?
81 Echo.
81 Echo.
I don't think it exists anymore because of PowerPoint and, computers. But back then, it was like charting and mapping and newsletters and all that stuff.
What year did you enter?
1983.
1983. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And tell us about the 353rd. Well, before we do that, can you kind of tell us in the layman's term, what is civil affairs? What's their mission?
So civil affairs is the bridge between humanitarian actors in the battlefield and civilians. There's always if there's a military operation, then you have your civilians, and you you're a branch of the military that's trying to identify what civilians need and create bridges of communications with them so that the military is just not seen as, either an occupying force or an aggressive force. So, for example, the origins of the 353rd comes from after World War II. There were, during the war, there were things that civilians needed in order for them to feel safe with this military operations. So, if there was a bell tower that was destroyed, and if there was a way to somehow do repairs or something, this civil military group would try to find the way to repair this just so that people could have their church bells on Sunday, for example. So it's kind of that branch of the military that is trying to create a bridge with the civilians on the ground. Later on, it also became the bridge between the military and humanitarian workers. So the civil affairs groups will come into Afghanistan, for example, and they'll try to identify what do the humanitarian actors need, or what are they opposed to that the military is doing in this location. So we're basically bridge builders. And the reason that it's mostly a civil affairs, it's a reserve occupation is because they want citizen soldiers to be in that branch.
Got it.
They want people that have a background in history or teaching or engineering or, public policy, administration, because those are the kind of careers and industries that will connect most with civilians. Like if you're just infantry trying to work with civilians, then you're always going to be thinking like battlefield versus what are these city needs.
Where was the 353rd located?
Loring Place North in the Bronx. So between the closest subway stations were Burnside and Fordham Road, the number 4.
Okay.
It's up on a hill across the street from Bronx Community College.
Right.
Yeah.
I mentioned
It's not there anymore.
Okay.
It's moved to Staten Island.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But all my time was here in the Bronx.
Now, talk to us about your colleagues at the 353rd Civil Affairs Command.
Yeah.
You know, and how often did you do every weekend, every month?
Yeah.
Did you do long term?
Yeah.
You know, there at the command.
Yeah.
Tell us about
We
that.
did. I started out as a private after I did all my military training. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. But sometimes the 2 weeks turned into 3 weeks. It depended. Because my unit was aligned with the European Command.
Got it.
We had to do a lot of NATO military exercises. So sometimes that extended a little bit, but generally it was 1 weekend a month to 2 weeks per year. And I was in really cool places for those 2 weeks. I remember I was a private, and the first place that we went for the 2 weeks was a little town very close to Venice, because that's where the military exercise was happening. So a lot of my training was these military exercises that were held by NATO. And it was like, troops from Germany, Belgium, England, all the NATO countries, plus the U.S. that would come together to do, scenarios of an event that might happen in a particular country where we would have to respond. So it was very cool. And since I was the illustrator, I got to do like the maps, and the charts, and whatever was needed in order to like all the visuals for presentations and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And back at the 353rd, what was it like on a day-to-day or weekend basis?
On the
when you were
weekend
there?
basis, it was kind of hard. I remember in the beginning, I was just like, I would walk in like with my shiny boots and my pressed uniform, so proud and everything. And I would walk around like, every office, I would say, do you need anything today? I was like so eager to work. Do you need anything to get? Like, no, we're okay. And I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing here? So finally, I aligned myself with the Public Affairs Office, because the Public Affairs Office was responsible for the newsletter. And so when I talked to that colonel who was responsible for that department, he told me, could you do this? Could you do this? Could you take photos? Could you help us lay out the newsletter and make it presentable? And I was like, yeah, of course. So I started becoming the newsletter person. And then that led into writing a little bit for the newsletter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I just kind of found my niche, because that was it was like a little bit of an ambiguous position. It was very useful during those exercises every year. But then on the weekend, the month to month, it was like, what do we do with her? So I just found my own place.
Right. And just to back it up a little, where did you go for basic training?
Fort Jackson.
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember that too.
You have any memories? Yeah, you'd like to share at Fort Jackson during AIT?
Fort Jackson, yeah.
And that's advanced initial training.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was basic training. Is that what you mean?
Basic training.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
basic training, yeah. Yeah, basic training was at Fort Jackson. I remember it was really hard because I had never run so much before. I wasn't like a big runner. And then all of a sudden you have to become a runner. And, all the trainings were super interesting. But I remember the drill sergeant. I forget what his name was. But we had one girl that was from Puerto Rico. And she barely spoke any English. And me, I grew up with my Spanglish, so I wasn't really fluent in Spanish either. And I remember that, I don't remember what her name is, but let's say that her name is Martinez and I'm Ortiz. And I remember that the drill sergeant would always put Martinez and Ortiz together for everything when there was like buddy work to do. Mm-hmm. And she and I would really kind of have a little bit of a hard time communicating, And yeah, so it was almost like you always felt like pigeonholed, And I remember that the drill sergeant always used to say, Ortiz, Ortiz. He would say, Mira, he would call at me, Mira, Mira. Like, and I'm just like, oh, like, how rude is that? Like,
Right.
so I remember once I was like so tired of it that I told him, I speak perfect English. You don't have to call me Mira. And then and I think that at that moment he didn't know if he should discipline me or if he was in the wrong and like let it go. And he just let it go. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to get punished. Oh my God, he's going to get me tonight. He's going to have me do 100 push-ups outside. But like never again did he say that. So it's just a really interesting. I feel like back then there was just a real awareness of color of your skin, last name, accents, whatever. And people would be similar to high school. You would be grouped like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now, where did you go to AIT to learn your MOS?
Yeah, to learn. I went to Denver, Colorado.
Wow.
For 5 months. Yeah. It was 5 months of art school. It was amazing. I felt so blessed, I didn't go to college. I wanted to be an artist. And here I was, kind of like in full-time college,
Sure.
We had to do military things as well, but mostly it was like get your MOS done. And I remember that we did sometimes still life drawing. We had the big easels, and each of us had to pose for each other, fully in uniform. There was no nudes or anything like that. You had to sit for each other, like still like this, and like draw and draw and draw and draw. So it was like just a really cool experience. Wow. Yeah. And plus, like, that was the first time that I ever went to ski, because they would have these weekend trips. And they would say, weekend in Vail, Colorado, weekend at, I don't even remember, Breckenridge, And it's like, these are places where people go to do serious skiing. And I was just learning there. So it was like very, very cool. It's the nice thing about being in the military, that you have this kind of access to the things that are in a cool place that you might find yourself stationed.
Now, when you went to basic training and AIT, I learned sometimes in the reserves, you don't go back to back. Sometimes it's lengthy.
Yeah.
You have to wait a year.
Yeah. No, mine fortunately was pretty back to back. I think I went home for 2 weeks in between, So I went home and then I was off again. So, and I had a full-time job. Because, I was like that citizen soldier. And my job was waiting for me to come back. They had to hold your job open for you and all that. And, I came back sort of like 7 months later. Like, okay, that's over. And I had, I guess, a little bit more skills, for the job. But eventually I moved into graphic design. And I kept on going with the courses at night and all that, and I ended up being a graphic artist.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah. Until I got deployed.
Well. What year was your first deployment, and where was it? And talk to us about that.
Yeah. So my first real deployment, listen, in between all of this, I decided to become an officer. I had enough college credits done to apply for the Reserve Officer Training School, which is up in Camp Smith. I don't know if it still exists, but back then it was. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was at Camp Smith 1 week in a month for a year. And I forgot what we were talking about.
We were talking about your first.
Oh, the deployment. Okay. I'm saying this because I was deployed. So when I was doing that 1 year, you cannot deploy anywhere because you're in a training status. So that was the year of Desert Storm.
Desert Storm 1.
Desert Storm 1. And so I was pretty untouchable. I wanted to go, and all my colleagues in the 353rd were going, but I was in officer training, and they said, you're not deployable. So I kind of, maybe I dodged a bullet on that one, but it is what it is. I missed that deployment. And later, now I was an officer, and in 1995, after the Bosnian War ceasefire was in place and a peace agreement was made, then my unit was called on to be the first civil affairs contingent to serve in the NATO peacekeeping mission.
What year was that?
That was 1995.
1995. You did say that.
Yeah.
Tell us about that deployment.
Yeah.
What was your mission and where did you live?
Yeah. So, that was really interesting because at first I was on the list. I got a phone call from a colonel who I was actually very good friends with. And he said, "Would you like to go?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, I'm putting you on the list." So I'm like, oh my God, at that, like, this is years later. I had my own apartment in the Upper West Side. I had a great job, and I was just like sitting there at home saying, oh my God, what did I just do? But then the next morning, I was just like, just do it. You've been in the military all these years. It's time to deploy, just do it. And during the day when I was at work, I got another call from him and he said, "We took you off the list." And I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, because we don't really need your skill set at this time." And I'm like, "What do you mean by my skill set?" Because we don't even know what we're going there to do exactly, So I started a little bit getting the feeling that it was either that I was too young or that I'm a female, or I just didn't understand
You
why.
were being pushed to the side, you felt.
I felt I was being pushed to the side. And I called him back and I said, "I want to go. I want to be put back on that list. And if I'm not put back on that list, then I don't know what I'm doing in the military, really, because these deployments are once in a lifetime opportunities to really use all the skills that you've built up all those years. And I need to use them, and I'm a good soldier. I excelled at everything. I was like, so, what do you call it? Like the overachiever,
Right.
So I was just like, how could you take me off the list? Like, to me, that was like kind of insulting. So he said, "Okay, are you sure? Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." Boom, I was back on the list. And about a month, like there's a deployment takes a long time.
Right.
It's kind of like the paperwork and just, you have to make all these arrangements with all of these other offices where you're going to go, that it's just a long process. So it probably took about 3 months before there was like a date, And in the meantime, I had to vacate my apartment. I had to notify my landlord. I had to notify my employer. I had to get my own affairs in order with the unit, like equipment. You have to have a will in place, all that. So I guess it's good that you have all that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, boom, we were gone. I think January of 1996. We were on our way.
Wow.
And it was all the, what do you call it? Hurry up and wait. Land in Germany. The next plane isn't ready. Then we fill up the plane with all the equipment. Then the plane can't take off. Then we have to remove all the, oh my God, this went on for weeks. So then finally we landed in Croatia, in Zagreb. And then it was like this big decision of who's going to go into Sarajevo, because Sarajevo was totally bombed out, no running water, whatever. And again, that selection process really kind of bugged me, because it was like, I want to go. And it's like, no, you're not on the list. I'm like, I want to get on that list. So finally I did make it into Sarajevo. Yeah. And it was very hard, very cold, no water. You would turn on the faucet and there would be a little drop, and then you go and get your washcloth. Like, okay, I'm going to collect this water so I can wash my face, Yeah.
So you deployed to a hard site.
Yeah, it was I mean, it wasn't shooting or anything, but it was destroyed. Yeah. So like finding things and getting to places was, I think that month, January, was a really hard month because nobody really knew if peace was going to hold, so we were always ready in case it doesn't. But at the same time, it was freezing cold. There was no running water. We were running on generators, and then the generators were, not coming fast enough. So yeah, it was kind of hard.
Wow. And how did you interact with the populace there? I mean, what was your mission and what did
Well, I mean, I was, as a lieutenant, I was responsible for logistics and equipment. So, just getting everything in place. There were always boxes coming, there was equipment coming, fax machines, well, not, I don't even know that it was laptops, but computers. Um, and I had to make sure that things were getting from point A to point B and that our office, which was called the Civil Military Operations Center, was getting fully set up. So I was hardcore logistics.
Got it. And how long were you there?
The deployment was 6 months, but I loved it so much. I was just like, for the first time in my life,
You love the no water and the heat, huh?
no, because everything started month by month by month by month. Everything started improving, and at the same time, you're getting used to it, getting used to it, getting used to it. So it's kind of like when those two things
Right.
merge, you're like, you're okay. Like, okay, I don't need to take a shower every morning. I'll just take it when the water comes. Like you start adjusting and you start seeing this magic happen of reconstruction and people coming out to the street and traffic lights start working little by little. And you just really feel like you're part of something historic. And I was like, my office in Manhattan, as big and important as I felt that job was, just felt like nothing compared to what I was doing in Bosnia. It was just like no comparison. And I was like, I want to be part of this. So I asked, to remain like an extension. And after a lot of paperwork and some resistance and all that, I was able to navigate that process to remain there as a reservist. It was very, very unusual situation, but I ended up getting this job in an office that I was assigned as logistics person, and they couldn't find a civilian to occupy that post. So they said, we'll take her as a military person, and there was a contract made and all of that. So I was sort of like a civilian soldier in Bosnia, and I stayed until the end of 1999.
Wow.
Yeah.
3 years.
3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a full tour.
Yeah.
That's a PCS.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
I just really loved it. It was a great, great experience. I made a lot of friends. I saw a lot of things happen. I met a lot of people, international. I was working for former minister and ambassador. Just really, this was an opportunity I would not get here in New York, unless if I was working at a high post at the UN or something like that. So yeah, it was really cool.
That's awesome. And when you came back at 99, did you go back to your job?
No.
Not even waiting for you.
When I extended, I left my job. You can't ask a job to hold your post for 3 years.
Right.
So I had closed that door on very good terms. They were very, very happy for me and very proud. And they said, this is great. We're so proud of you, whatever. So it was all kind of on good terms. But I learned so much there that I felt like I can't go back to that career field. So I decided to focus on finishing my undergraduate degree because I was only 2 years in, and I was just like, wow, I'm way behind on that. And so I saved up all my money in Bosnia, and I decided that I was going to go to college full-time. I was going to do this full-time thing that I never had access to before. Right. I never had money for. And I did it in Madrid, Spain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you didn't use a GI Bill or anything? I guess in Madrid you wouldn't have been able to.
No, I wasn't. Back then, it looked different. I did use the military benefits that I had to pay for each credit a little bit at a time.
Got it.
But yeah, there was like, it's not the GI Bill like it looks now. It was a different model.
Now, tell us, Lieutenant Ortiz.
Yeah.
You're in Madrid, Spain, finishing your undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
Where did you live in Spain? What school did you go to?
Yeah.
So what did you get your degree in?
Yeah, so I got I went to St. Louis University, so that's an American aligned university that has a campus in Madrid, Spain. And I did 1 year full time. It wasn't enough to finish,
Mhm.
but it was enough to like, it was a big push.
Mhm.
And I also had to maintain my reserve status. So I was doing my reserve duty it wasn't even a weekend a month. It was like an afternoon every week to make up a weekend at Spain's Ejército del Aire headquarters in the middle of Spain. So I was there. My reserve unit and my colonel and me made this really interesting arrangement, and they accepted that I would work there so that I could get my reserve duty points and continue to be a reservist on duty. So I worked there, and it was nice because they gave me specific tasks and jobs, and it was interesting to learn from that side of the house. Plus, like just being in Spain was just like that immersion in Spanish. That was really what I needed. It was
Got
one of
it.
the reasons why I chose Spain because I said I worked with Spaniards in Spain, and I also worked for a little while back in basic training with that girl that only spoke Spanish. I felt like I could never really manage
Mhm.
the language fluently, and I really wanted that. So I decided I'm just going to study there. And I put myself in some Spanish language classes where it was like, turn on the TV at night, it's Spanish. You go to school, it's Spanish. You're out in the street, it's Spanish. Your landlady is Spanish. Like, it was like full on immersion. So it was a good thing to do.
Wow. When did you leave Madrid and where'd you go from there?
Yeah, so I left Madrid in 2000. Yeah, and I came back. I came back to the Bronx. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was hard because it's like you think, I got this, college and I spent 3 years in Bosnia and I
Mhm.
speak Spanish fluently now and all that. And I still was having a hard time breaking into this field of humanitarian work. So that took a little while it was like a lot of ups and downs, but it was like a big career shift for me.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And when you came back to the Bronx, what did you do? I mean, gosh, gone so long at this point.
Yeah, like, you just get back into the groove and, like, listen, I have three sisters and a brother and parents, and you start getting back into their lives too. I mean, I was gone for 4 years. I would come home for the holidays, either Thanksgiving or Christmas every year, sometimes Easter as well. And, but you're missing a lot. I was missing a lot. I was missing my nieces and nephews growing up. I was missing all the things that were going on in my sister's lives and all that. So it was nice to be back. And of course, my parents loved that I was back home. So,
Now, when we deploy to the military, I mean, with the military, we always depend on those boxes. Can you tell us about your goodie boxes that you got from family while you were in Bosnia?
yeah, I mean, I have to say, you know, I didn't get very many, and I didn't want very many. We got so many boxes of candies and cookies from strangers around the United States.
Right.
A lot of teachers make it as school projects and all that. And I was a logistics officer. So I'm the one that's managing the candies and the letters, all these things that are coming in. So it was just like, I was basically like, don't send me anything. I can't handle another box. We really, people are very generous during deployments, and it's really nice, but sometimes it's hard to manage.
Mhm.
You know, it's hard to manage.
Wow.
So getting letters was nice, but getting boxes, I didn't need it.
Now, following Madrid, how did your career go from there?
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of twists and turns because I decided that with all the experience that I had, and I was finishing up a bachelor in fine arts, and I didn't want to be in fine arts anymore. I wanted to be in international work. I met so many interesting people, and I learned about what the U.S. government's role is in humanitarian crisis. I learned about refugee issues. I decided that I wanted to get into that field. And it was really difficult, you know. Yeah, it was difficult to get into. I didn't have a master's degree. I didn't study international affairs or anything like that. So, you know, like you start hitting all those walls of the things I thought I had all this, but then you start realizing all the things that you don't have. So, you know, I knew that with time I had to do another tour of some kind. I left the military, by the way.
At that point?
No, I left the military shortly after I came home. Or maybe I left the military while I was in Spain.
Wow. What
Yeah.
was that decision like? I mean, how did it? It's not an easy decision.
Yeah.
Now it's 16 years.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Kosovo was starting up, the conflict in Kosovo. And I started having the feeling like my unit again was getting pulled into that deployment, and a lot of people were deployed. A lot of people that went to Bosnia were naturally deployed to Kosovo. These are countries that are in the same region, and the skill sets, you know, are the same. And I just decided I didn't want to do this as a military person anymore. I wanted to do it as a civilian.
Okay.
I wanted to be a humanitarian worker. I didn't want to be the person in uniform.
And is that what you ended up doing?
Yeah.
So tell us about your job.
Yeah, so I started, you know, like when I came home and couldn't get the job, then Afghanistan started. World Trade Center, you know, was bombed, and then shortly after that, it was bombing campaign in Afghanistan, and there was still a humanitarian mission going on there, especially after the bombing subsided, and there were opportunities to make inroads and to start development of the country. Um, and I contacted one of the people that I knew from Bosnia, and I said, I'm looking for a job. No intention of Afghanistan, but he said, we have a lot of jobs for Afghanistan. A lot of people are not filling those jobs. And then I was like, oh my God, okay, I have to go to Afghanistan. And I just said, just do it. Just do it. My parents thought I was absolutely out of my mind, you know, but I was just like, I have to get the experience.
When did you go to Afghanistan?
That was in the World Trade Center was when? It was like 5 months after that.
Okay, Vanessa, we left off, we were talking about you getting out of the military. Now you're a civilian and you accepted a humanitarian job in Afghanistan. Take it from there.
Yeah.
What year and what did you do?
Yeah, so that was in April or May, I think April of 2022. I was working for a humanitarian organization called Mercy Corps, and they needed an administration and logistics manager. So again, admin and logistics, you know, I didn't have the breadth of programmatic knowledge to do anything more specific for a humanitarian organization, and a lot of people that are new at this field start out with the admin jobs. So I was responsible for the purchasing, for the procurement, for the warehousing of goods, also for all the staff that were translators, so our Afghan staff that served as translators, the transportation pool. I was like, I think I supervised. And it was like, we were in Kandahar and we had an office there, but then there were all these little offices and satellite places where we had staff. But it was probably in the 300 person range.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So it was like a big job. I didn't realize how big it would be. But, you know, and a lot of our Afghan staff, similar to my work in Bosnia, spoke English. They were young. They were interested. You know, they liked working with international people. It was a chance for them to gain skills and connections and all that. So a lot of really nice people I met there as well. But the conditions were hard. Opposite of Bosnia when I first got there, it was very, very hot. You know, very poor, very dusty. And a small staff, and really, like, I was, for a good long time, I was the only female there. We had staff that were female that were outside, maybe nurses that were very, very far away, but in our headquarters base, and with all the translation staff and the transportation guys, the drivers, all that. Like I was the boss of a lot of men.
Good for you.
Yeah. So, but it started getting kind of dicey a couple of months in. We had our first bomb that was close to the compound, and I didn't really feel like our safety was tight.
Mm-hmm.
This is sometimes the difference from being in the military where safety is number one and all that, and then you work for a humanitarian organization and they hire a safety officer, but he's a civilian, he's in Afghanistan, he's drawn from retirement. I kind of saw a little bit too much bebidas at night.
Got it.
And I'm like, if something were to happen and he's under the influence, it's like, am I really safe? So I just decided that, I got 6 months of experience. Time to go home.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And came back. You're not a reservist anymore,
I'm not a reservist.
So you don't have your job guaranteed.
It's like, okay, so now let's see if I can get the job, And I ended up getting a job pretty quickly. It was a startup organization, but it was a very successful man in the humanitarian, field that was starting his own organization. So it was an opportunity to really learn and be mentored by someone very closely. And he opened up a little office in Wall Street, and it was nice because he held a lot of events with a lot of prominent people, and I got to understand a lot. So it was almost a little bit like being like an educational experience. Okay. Even though I was still doing a lot of the administrative work, but I was also doing his research and stuff like that. And then Iraq 2 happened, and he lost a lot of funding, and I ended up having to look again for another job. So I ended up joining the International Rescue Committee, which is here in New York, the headquarters.
Okay.
Founded by Albert Einstein, works on refugee and immigrants. And I got a really cool job there. And I stayed there for 7 years.
Wow.
So that was really like the big launch.
Okay. From the early 2000s till now, you're a veteran.
Yeah.
How is that veteran? How your benefits? How were you treated as a veteran?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us.
Yeah.
Was it easy?
I in the humanitarian field, especially during those Republican years and the interventions that the military had, that impacted civilians.
Mm-hmm.
It was not good to say. I wasn't in the office bragging that I was a former military officer. I kind of kept it on the down low. Wow. Sometimes when you're being hired and you have to check the box, are you a veteran, whatever, I would check yes, but it was something that I never really talked about, because even I remember once I was applying for a job at the UN, and a friend, I was going to say, I served in Bosnia with the NATO Peacekeeping, and she said, don't say that. So I think these were years where being in the military was not, maybe similar to Vietnam veterans. It wasn't really looked favorably. I had a job also where in Washington, D.C., where they said, don't talk about that, because you could be seen as, in favor of wars, in mm-hmm. favor of violence. So, and I think that probably this is something that a lot of veterans also struggle with. People see that you're a veteran and they're like, oh, you're pro-war. And sometimes, like, we learn what war is about, and we're actually anti-war,
People don't realize.
Yeah.
No one dislikes war more than a soldier.
Exactly.
Who goes?
Exactly. And nobody sees the, sometimes ineffectiveness or the flaws in training or the damage that could be caused. The impact of civilian lives. Like, you learn all of that, and then you're like less inclined to go that way. So I think that now I feel that it's more, I could talk about it more without being looked at that way. So I have a little bit more veteran pride now, I think, than I ever did in the past. Talking with circles of colleagues.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And where are you now? I mean, you with the International Rescue Committee?
No, I left them during COVID, actually. Yeah. I started my own business. You know, you're locked up in your house, your job completely changes. I did a lot of international travel. All of a sudden now, there's no travel. I just was like, what am I doing with my life? You know, you wonder, like I'm sure you did, like, how long do I have to live? Am I going to get COVID and end up in the hospital or whatever? So I was just like, make life count. And I just started getting into my creative side again. And I started designing a website, and I decided, you know, after many years of dabbling in interior design and using my Illustrator creative juices that way, I decided to start my own business. And I was like, what's my business name? What's it going to be? I'm going to design people's homes. I'm going to make them more colorful and beautiful. And I just was like, what am I about? And I'm just like, I'm a Bronx girl. So I'm going to call my business Bronx Girl Design.
Wow.
And that's my business's name.
Okay. Give us your website.
Yeah. So it's www.bronxgirldesign or this Bronx Girl Designs. You can find it either way if you Google it. Yeah. And I do that. That's my side gig now. But during the COVID years, I was doing that pretty successfully full time. And then I just decided, like, after things started opening up again and the economy was getting kind of rough and the clients weren't really coming in, I decided maybe it's time to go back to work. I didn't want to do international work anymore. I was like, I want to focus on my country now. So many, you know, like George Floyd and all of this, you know, Me Too, it all exposed a lot of the problems in this country. And I was like, instead of taking my skills and my knowledge outside to all these other countries, I'm gonna put it here. So I started looking for jobs, and I found this excellent job at Innocence Project.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
No.
Innocence Project works to free wrongfully convicted people, and it's a national, you know, I work for the national network, which is all of these innocence organizations. I support them with, you know, processes of forming board of directors, challenges that they might have in HR, strategic planning, all the skills that I've built over the past years and skills that I've built supporting local organizations around the world, kind of bringing it to bear for this mission of unjust incarcerations. So all of these organizations open up cases of people that are claiming innocence, where either it was a forced confession, or sometimes it's a misidentification of someone and then you end up in jail. But it's really, really, it really affects people of color in this country. The majority of of exonerations and wrongful convictions are people of color. So it's the, you know, bias and racism is very real in the policing and justice system. So I'm working in some small way to help all these organizations become stronger administratively, leadership wise, so that they could do this work.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm very, very happy. And I still do my design work on the side.
Yeah, I could tell you that's just like gonna be with you. That's your passion.
Yeah, that's my passion. That's like my retirement plan.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you'd like to talk to us about your veteran status?
No, I mean, you know, I have a lot of good memories. I also have memories, you know, like after many years of so much change and so much exposure to social justice and inequality and all that, I kind of look at things differently. I think that some of my male colleagues from the 353rd look at their service in a very nostalgic way, like, you know, we did great work here, whatever. And I just feel like I have a different perspective on it that maybe rubs a little bit with theirs. I kind of feel as a woman, I wonder if we were really treated equally, if we were really given all the same opportunities and the fair chances. You know, even my name being taken off that list. Why was it? You know, was it my rank? Was it my age? Was it my gender? You don't really know. I looking at things, you know, sometimes the way that the fact, remember when I decided to become an officer, it was during this formation at the 353rd. You know, formations, you have all the enlisted people on this side, you know, for morning announcements and the flag, you know, raising of the flag and all that. And you have all your officers on this side. And I remember just I was in the back and I'm looking at all these people of color are enlisted and all these people that are officers are white. And I remember on top of that, all the people on this side, of all the people on this side that are white, there was only 2 women. You know, and it was just like, wait a minute, this is not right. And I decided I'm going to move to this side. I have to find a way to move to the side. And that was really what prompted me to become an officer. So it's kind of like all these memories now that I have this wider lens of justice and equality and all that, kind of like shows me that, you know, sometimes your path, if you're not really looking at these things and pushing yourself to be part of those groups, to move from this group in the lunch table to the other side, like if you're not doing that, then you're going to remain like in this comfort zone that's comfortable maybe for you, but it's also very comfortable for them. And like we always have to be working to break out of those comfort zones and also to be moving into this unknown territory because we belong there too, you know? So I feel like I tried to end my military service in that vein of move out of your comfort zone, work in other countries, expand even out of the military and out into a broader world and other careers that there's lots of Puerto Ricans that don't even know about, you know? I remember when I was in Afghanistan and I had a conversation with this woman that was our, I don't remember what role she played in medical program manager or something like that. And she said, how come you're the only Puerto Rican I've ever met on a tour? I've been to Sudan. She's naming all the countries where she's been. I've never met a Puerto Rican. And I was just like, okay, I cannot speak for all Puerto Ricans on this, but maybe we've just never been exposed. Maybe we've got our own problems in our own country and choose not to start going to, like you have to be a little bit in a place of privilege to start running off to other countries to help people. And maybe I was in part, maybe it was my ambition or my sense of adventure or my need to like do something that nobody else does. You know, like I've always been like that. Do the thing nobody else does is part of why I joined the military. Do the thing that nobody else is doing. Do the hard thing. So anyway, I guess I would just say like we all as Puerto Ricans and people of the Bronx, we need to break into these fields and do the hard stuff and make our, you know, be out there. And I think it's happening. I look at Sonia Sotomayor and I'm like, oh my God, Supreme Court, like how amazing, you know? So little by little, we all have to do our part to break out of our comfort circles.
That's very well said. And is there anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share?
No, I don't think so. This has been long enough already.
We like to end all our oral histories with one question.
Okay.
What does the Bronx mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, the Bronx is home. I don't know. I mean, I've lived away from the Bronx many years. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while to work for the U.S. government. I worked in Afghanistan. I worked in Bosnia. But like I always say, all roads lead back to the Bronx. sometimes the Bronx, I feel in a way, was my shield. Um, I remember once I went to Liberia and I was with some Liberian guys. This was on, um, an exercise that we were doing there. Not a military exercise, but like an exercise, a humanitarian kind of exercise. And they would ask me, like people would always ask me, where are you really from? Like you're American, but where are you really from? And I would say, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm from the Bronx. Oh my God, you're from the Bronx. Wow, she's from the Bronx. Like everybody would know they wouldn't know Puerto Rico, but they would know the Bronx. And it was just like, it was like just all of a sudden I have this badge, she's from the Bronx, she's badass. And it's like everywhere I've gone, people know the Bronx. Some people think of it like, wow, you're really tough. Some people say that's really cool. That's where hip hop was born, whatever. So it's kind of cool to come from the Bronx. I don't know that I'll live here forever. Who knows? But I'm really proud that I'm from here, and I use it in my business name. I talk about the Bronx at work. Yeah, so it's really a nice thing to say you're from the Bronx. Go anywhere around the world, and people will know what you're talking about when you say I'm from the Bronx.
That's right. And a commissioned officer in the United States Army Reserve.
Yeah.
Vanessa Ortiz,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your contributions to the
Yeah.
Bronx Veterans Archival Initiative.
Yeah, thank you.